Well, on Dad's side of the family, my grandparents were Albert and Rowena Needham, and they were born in Kincardine, Ontario, Canada. Albert Needham was born in 1874 to 1956, and my grandmother Rowena, 1877 to 1963. And they were married in 1901. And both of them, they didn't like the idea of baptizing babies. That's what the Church of Canada did. Of course, that's an offshoot of the Church of England. And so it was either the Reverend, one of the 70s of the church. It might have been Brother Cornish. I'm not sure which one it was. It could have been Cornish, but anyway, one of the 70s in the RLDS church, they told Grandma and Grandpa about the Book of Mormon and the theology of the RLDS church. Also, the fact that the age of accountability was 8 years of age. Well, Grandpa and Grandma, they like that idea.
Yeah.
You know, 8, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So anyway, they joined the church then because they did have altogether 8 children. Well, they had 10, but 8 of them survived. And so while they were living in Ontario, Kincardine, Ontario, Canada, they had a few children, and then they had more when they moved to Knob Noster, Missouri. And so in Canada, my Aunt Berna was born in 1903, my Uncle Alvin in 1905, my Aunt Lula in 1907, my Aunt Ruby in 1908. I don't know whether Aunt Ruby was born in Knob Noster or Canada, but anyway, in 1908, oh yes, they moved to Knob Noster because Grandpa saw a business opportunity in Knob Noster. And so they moved to Knob Noster, Missouri, and he bought a farm supply store in Knob Noster. And in Knob Noster, they had additional children. Let's see, get this right. Okay, Aunt Ruby was either born in Canada or Knob Noster, 1908. And then my Aunt Ada in 1910. My Aunt Nina in 1912. My father, Richard A. Needham, 1913. So in 1914, the family moved to Mapleton, Kansas, because Grandpa wanted to farm again. So he sold his business in Knob Noster, and with the money, they bought a farm about 3 or 4 miles northwest of Mapleton. And I remember asking Dad about growing up there, and they said that, well, we didn't have electric lights, but we have gas lights, because there was a natural gas well on their property. And so they had gas lights, and they said they all had plenty to eat and all of that. And everything was, so there was a house full of them. Because there was Grandpa and Grandma and 8 children. And when they got to Knob Noster, there was 2 that were born in One was born in 1915, one in 1917, but they didn't survive infancy. And then the last child was my Aunt Bessie, 1921. Grandma was 45 then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when my Aunt Bessie was born. Anyway, let's see how we go along here. So anyway, so they grew up on the farm, and they all went their separate ways eventually. My father, he's kind of stayed on the farm during the 30s, helping his dad. And I remember Dad told a story. He had a 1932 Chevrolet coupe convertible, the fanciest Chevy you could buy that particular year. So Grandpa, he told my dad, just go to the bank, and the bank, there was a bank in Mapleton then, just go to the bank and make payments. He'd go to the bank, and the banker would say, Richard, I'm busy, come back some other time. After several times the dad went there trying to make a payment, he said, oh, Richard, that car has been paid for. Your dad paid for that car. So Grandpa paid it off, and he liked to play tricks like that sometimes. So it was so Dad met Mom in I think at the roller ring in Fort Scott in 1936. I think she was a senior at Bolton High School, and she was sitting there with one of her friends, and they looked up and saw the 3 or 4 guys, and Mom said, who is that bunch? Oh, that's that rowdy bunch from Mapleton. And well, anyway, Dad and Mom met and dated, and then they got married in August or September. I think it was late August of 1939. They got married in Mapleton. One of the RLDS preachers married him. It might have been Lee Quick that married him. I'm not sure. Either Lee Quick or Dennis. Anyway. Now, so that's the story. And there is a side story to that. My grandmother, Rowena Needham, well, she had several sisters, maybe 3 or 4. And her oldest sister was Sadie. Sadie was born in 1872, and she married an Isaac Stringer. Isaac Stringer was a priest in the Church of Canada, and he was also became the Archbishop of Newfoundland. So anyway, Isaac Stringer and my great aunt Sadie, they took the gospel of Christ to the native peoples. Some people call them Eskimos, but that usually it's just the Canadian Indians in the Northwest Territories. That's where they took the gospel, according to the Church of England, because he was a member of the Church of Canada. So they gave them the basic gospel. But before they taught the Indians about Jesus and the Bible and all of that, the fur traders were taking undue advantage of the Indians, the native peoples. They were giving their seal skins to these traders for bottles of whiskey. Well, the Reverend Stringer had to teach them that is no good for you people to drink that stuff. And he gave them the true, he said, gold or silver, Canadian money, real money. He said, and he told them what the sealskins were worth. And he said, you don't take bottles of whiskey, you take real money for your sealskins. And then he taught them other practical things. Okay. He did that before he started preaching the gospel to the native peoples. And they became very loving and respectful of the Reverend Stringer for helping them that way. Mm-hmm. So his missionary work was very successful with the native peoples. And later on, I think he was born in 1865 or 66 and lived to 1936, the Reverend Stringer. But in 1936, Sadie wrote an article in Collier's magazine about taking the gospel to the native peoples in the Northwest Territories of Canada. And that was in Collier's magazine. And the adventures they had in the 1890s, taking the gospel to the native Indians. And so that covers Dad's side of the family. And I need to say something about my mother's side of the family. That was James E. Foote, 1875, 1966. And he married Lily Heppard Foote in 1901. No, wait. They were married in 1900. Anyway, he had a farm in Yates Center, Kansas. And Grandpa told me this story when we went to visit. They lived in Hume, Missouri. And there was a group of men on horseback rode up to the farm. And they said, Mr. Foote, come ride with us. We're chasing a horse thief. And my grandmother spoke up and she said, tell him you're busy, Jim. Tell him. So he told him that he was busy. And he probably was pretty busy because he was a hard worker and always doing something. And so they rode away chasing the horse thief. And I always thought what an adventure that would have been if Grandpa would have rode with them to catch the horse thief. Yeah. And then they had, I think, 5 children. And yeah, my Aunt Edith, 1903, and my Uncle Eugene, 1899. My Aunt Mildred, 1912. My Uncle Kenneth, he lived in Hume. He worked he owned a construction company. He was born in 1914. And I remember in 1966 in the summer, I worked for him on his construction company. And I learned a lot about how things were built, rebar and concrete, foundation, and all that stuff, just by working with him.
Good education.
And yeah, and then he was born in 1914, and my mother was born in 1918, and then they had a daughter born in 1921. She had, she had severe vision problems and she was mentally retarded. So she died in 1950. I never really knew her. So.
Who's this? I'm sorry, Jim.
Who
died in 1950?
Her name was Helen, and she was the youngest daughter of Lily and James Foote. She was born in 1921. So that's pretty much the family history that I covered.
Jim,
Let me see if I can get anything else in here.
is the farm still up there?
So I think that covers about everything. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
Is the farm still up there in Mapleton?
Okay.
The old
No,
farmhouse.
it was purchased by other people
Okay.
because Grandpa, let's see, when did he sell the farm? Sometimes I think somewhere in the early 40s, he sold the farm and moved to Mapleton. But my brother and I would go over there to mow their lawn when they lived in Mapleton. And he had that old push mower. No engine on it, the rotary push mower. And see, Grandpa Needham, he had cattle and he had livestock and all of that on his farm northwest of Mapleton. But when he moved to Mapleton, he had sheep, and he still kept active, taking care of the sheep, and he still would go out there and shear the sheep, with the sheep shears. And so he kept quite active. And I remember, he died in 1956. But the Fort Scott Tribune published an article in I think it was 1954, and Grandpa was up on a ladder, and there's an article from the Fort Scott Tribune about Grandpa Needham, how he was still kept active, and the Fort Scott Tribune was interviewing him, and he said, "Oh yes, I still keep active." He said, "The local people need their gutters cleaned out and straightened up and stuff." And so he still does that kind of stuff. He still kept active. And so.
Jim, I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned that your mom and dad met at a roller rink in the 1930s. Would have been during the heart of the Great Depression. I'm curious how your family did during the Depression, if you know any of that history. And then also part two is, did you have any family members who got caught up in serving in World War II, since kind of in that age?
Okay. Well, I don't think Mapleton was really in that Dust Bowl. That was mostly mid-Kansas on western Kansas, because I know the Wellington family moved from western Kansas to get away from that. But anyway, Mom and Dad both told me that during the Depression, yeah, there were, lack of this and lack of that, but since they lived on the farm, and they said they never missed a meal. They always had plenty to eat, and it didn't seem like they were deprived of anything, because, like I said, Dad got that 1932 Chevrolet for Dad. The young man who originally bought that car, he couldn't make payments, so it went back to the bank. So that car was probably a couple of years old before Dad got it, but it was still a snazzy car. And Dad told me a lot of his buddies didn't have a car because they had to use their parents' car if they had a date or something. And that car had a rumble seat. So they used a double tape. Either go to the roller ring in Fort Scott or the Fox Theater or the drive-in Fort Scott.
Hey, Arlene, can you mute? I'm not sure, somebody needs to mute their mic.
I'm trying.
Okay.
You can do it on this too.
My chin,
Do it. I'll do it.
And I had a question. Did you run through those?
What?
Oh, yes. So you had a second part, didn't you?
Well, I assume you were born in the early 1940s, Jim, is that right?
I was born the last day of 1943.
43, so did your father, any uncles get caught up in World War II?
Okay. Okay, I'll tell you about that. Dad had a slight injury. He fell into a well in 1939, so but it healed up okay. But during the draft physical, it told Dad that he couldn't march, that he wouldn't be able to, because just a very slight limp. So they told him to get a job in the war plant. So Dad worked at Pratt and Whitney. They made airplane engines. That's out on Bannister on 95th Street. So he was one of the foremen in the airplane factory during World War II.
Do you happen to know what type of aircraft he built?
Well, it was airplane engines. That's what Dad told me. They
Uh-huh.
made airplane
So it
engines.
could be more.
So he was one of the foremen, and they said they had older men and women and working there. A lot of women. Yeah.
Jim, do you know the beginning of the Mapleton Church story?
Okay, I can tell you that. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me because I had written that down. Okay, the Mapleton Church. First of all, I want to finish this question. Eldon Castle. He married my Aunt Bessie. Okay. Eldon Castle, born 1921 till, I don't know, 20 years ago he died.
I actually knew Eldon Castle.
You knew Uncle Eldon. Yeah.
He was an evangelist in the church, wasn't
Yeah.
he?
Yeah.
Gentleman.
His children go to the alternative church. Ronnie and Vicky, they go to the alternative church. But yeah, Uncle Eldon was in the Pacific Theater of the war. He was a sergeant. And he was in war. In fact, Ronnie, his son Ronnie, when he lived in Fort Scott, I went over there to visit him one day, and when he lived in Fort Scott, and he said, "Come on in this room, Jimmy. I want to show you something." And he showed me a lever action rifle that the Japanese used that he got as a trophy, and that he had brought back from the war. And, now, okay, church history. In 1911, they met in one of the halls, one of the meeting halls in downtown Mapleton. The church did. So they formed the church in 1911, and I think Lee Quick was one of the head honchos that formed the Mapleton Church. And Lee Quick later became a 70 in the church. He was a longtime pastor. He was, at one point, he served as pastor for like 20 years. And someone else served for pastor. And then he served for pastor. And so anyway, they formed the church in 1911. In 1915 and 16, they discussed we need a church building. We need a church building. So they had fundraisers to get the money together. And so Grandpa Needham and his friends, his farmer friends, in the fall of 1916 and the winter of 1917, they physically built the church there in Mapleton. And they had someone from Independence to kind of supervise, but Grandpa and his farmer friends, they did all the work. And he just kind of supervised the guy from Independence. And in fact, in 2017, in 2017, we had a 100th anniversary reunion at the Mapleton Church. And I mean, a lot of people, 200 or 300 people showed up. Like the people that I went to church with as a kid, just most of them showed up for that. The church was packed, and we had a real good service that day, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Mapleton Church. And now it's going on. There's still people going there, but not quite the numbers that it was when I was growing up. And but it's, in fact, my cousin-in-law, who was married to my first cousin, Helen. She was one of Alvin and Lucy's daughters, the last daughter. She was born in 1948, and she married Richard Long, and they both went to Blue Mountain High School like I did. But let's see, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. So Richard Long was pastor at the Mapleton Church for a while. He's not pastor. I forget who the pastor is now, but the number of people that show up is maybe not as many as we are. Maybe there's people that still go there, but not as many as even come here.
Is Richard Long Carla Long's dad?
Do they what?
Is Richard Long Carla Long's dad?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, he is.
And another question, if you're finished with the history part,
Yeah, what's that?
how many siblings do you have and where do they live?
How many children do what?
How many siblings do you have?
Brothers and sisters.
and
Oh, brothers and
Where
sisters.
do they live?
Okay. My sister, Pamela, she was born in 1950. Her and her husband, Larry Ham, they have a place on Lake Tamacomo in, between Branson and Hollister. But they still have their house 5 miles north of Fort Scott. So they go back and forth. I asked my sister last weekend when we had our family reunion down there in Mapleton. I said, when are you going to sell the house here and the main house here? And she said, I don't know, Jim. We can't make up our minds. So they go back and forth. They usually spend a week in Branson and then they come back and they still have the house there north of Fort Scott. So I don't know. I don't know when they're going to move to Branson permanently. But if Larry had his way, they would be in Branson all the time because he loves the area and he loves to fish and And he's got a boat dock on Lake Tamacomo and all of that. And so that's about all I have.
So you just have the one sister?
Okay. I have, yeah, Pamela and Danny Glenn Needham, October 1945. He couldn't give up his smoking. I tried to help him. He died in 2000. Let's see, he died in 77. No, wait a minute. This is 2000. Boy, the years go by so fast. So we had, let's see, this is 2005. 25. 3. He died in 2003. 2000. He died 3 years ago. Yeah. Yeah. And now I do have a brother, Michael, who's in the KNI in Topeka, mental retardation. But I haven't seen him in a long time. I tell Pam we need to go to Topeka and see him sometime, but I don't know when that will be. And no, that's about it that I have.
Okay, Jim,
Oh,
how long have you been,
What?
how long have you been going here to Mission Road Church?
I've been going here, I think it was either the late 1980s or early 1990s. I think it was in the 1980s.
Yeah.
I started coming here.
Did you move here from Mapleton?
I moved to the Kansas City metro area in 1973. 1973.
For a
I
job?
Fort Scott didn't have any art galleries. There wasn't any art there. And I figured I would move up here and it'd be close to where the art galleries and stuff was. And so it's just like, well, where I live now, for instance, I only live, see how far, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. 3.5 blocks from KU Med Center. That's a good thing because I've had all this thyroid surgery and this thing and that thing. So it's a good thing because I bought that house. Oh, this is an interesting story. The house that I live in now, the 3.5 blocks west of KU Med Center. So if I have an appointment, I just walk over there. I don't have a car anyway. Even when I had a car, I'd walk over there because I didn't want to pay for the parking. And so
Did you,
anyway, this is an interesting thing, and then I think I'm finished. But the I was going to buy a house at the Rosedale Drive-In Theater down there on Merriam Lane. Okay, for $17,500. This was in 1973, and because I already went through the seminar how to buy a house, and went through the seminar with others, and we were driving on Springfield Street, and I saw the house, 3920 Springfield. I saw the house, and I told the agent that I was riding with, I want to look in that house. Okay. So we went up there and I looked through the house and looked, and I said, what do they want for this one? And he said, 21,000. And And I said, pretty close to KU Med Center. And he said, yeah. And well, I wound up buying the house. But I was supposed to close on the house over by the Boulevard Theater. And I had, now this is the truth. I don't think I've ever told anyone this. I had night after night after night, I had the same dream. I had the same dream every night about if I bought that house, because I was close to the railroad, very close to the railroad. And that whistle would always, anyway, that I would be disturbed by the whistle at night. And there was no bus service down there on the boulevard. And there was the boulevard and Merriam Lane hooked together down that area, Rosedale. And okay, there was a lot of negatives if I bought that house there. And I had already looked at the house at 3920. So I think that was the Lord, because the dream was the same dream every night. And I think the Lord was guiding me to buy the house on Springfield Street because he knew that I would need the KU Med Center for medical help later in life. And so that was a wonderful blessing right there.
Jim, what did you do as a career?
What
was your career?
Oh boy. I have to get into that. Anyway, I've got a master's in art education, and I taught in Indiana 1 year. I didn't have a very good experience. I should have asked my older cousins about discipline. Anyway, they didn't rehire me, and I wanted to come back anyway. And I got my master's, and so I mostly worked as a substitute teacher over in KCMO, and the last was 12 years with the Shawnee Mission School District as a substitute teacher. And I was in Kansas City College of Medical and Dental Careers, on phone work, recruiting students for the school, things like that. And but the main thing I'm proud of is my art and being in art shows and things of that sort. The latest art show was at the Smalter Gallery on West 39th Street. I was in a group show called The Artist of 39th Street, and I had 3 works of art in that. I sold one of them. And then coming up in November, I'm going to be in another group show in Art for All at the Kansas City Artist Coalition Gallery on the Gillum Road, 3800 Gillum Road. And then in January and February of 2026, we're having the art auction gallery showing an exhibition at the Kansas City Artist Coalition Gallery. And so
That's a really.
I never was in the Plaza Art Show. I mean,
Yeah.
years ago, I called them up. I said, I'm an artist. What do I have to do to be I'd like to be in the Plaza Art Show. And they said, well, Mr. Needham, first of all, we choose you. You don't choose us. And they said, this is a juried show, by the way. So they would say, and I said, what's the entry fee? And they said, this was like in the 70s. And the entry fee was $200 or $300. I don't know what it is now, but and I said, well, thanks for the information. Goodbye.
Yeah. That's why they have the Unplaza show also.
Yeah.
Little question about your art. Seems like a lot of the pictures you draw have a vehicle in them.
Oh, yeah.
How did that get started?
Yeah, well, my brother Danny majored in art. He majored in auto technology, so he knew the mechanical part. But being an artist, I learned a little bit of that from him, but the basics. But anyway, because I took driver's ed. But I've always liked antique classic cars because I like the body styles and being an artist and all. I think one of the best cars ever made was the Model A Ford. It was basic, it was sturdy, it was a big improvement from the Model T. And it was the same basic car, 1928, 29, 30, and 31. They made the same Model A Ford. It's a little bit change in the flow of the fenders. That's about it. It was the same basic sturdy Model A Ford for 4 years without radical body changes. And so that's an interesting story there, is because Edsel Ford was Henry Ford's only son. He was born around 1895. And he said, Dad, he went Henry Ford. He said, Dad, he said, Chevrolet is killing us in sales. We got to make a change. He said the Model T is old fashioned compared to the Buicks, Cadillacs, and Chevys and other cars. At first, Henry Ford said, oh, no. And then, okay, go ahead and make your Model A. Let's see what happens. And so they retooled, and so they started producing the Model A in 1928. And they sold like hotcakes. And they outsold Chevrolet that year. They outsold Chevrolet for 4 years, 28, 29, 30, and 31. And so that was a good decision. And then another car that I like is a 1957 Chevrolet two-door hardtop. That's one of the most beautiful cars Chevrolet ever made. There was a Gary Nicholson. I remember him years and years ago. He was 2 or 3 years older than me. He was dating, what was her name? I can't remember. Ann Brediker. Anyway, they pulled into the driveway in his beautiful 1957 Chevrolet two-door hardtop. And so anyway,
If you could travel anywhere in the world to see a famous piece of art, which one would it be? What would you be most interested in seeing?
I'd like
good one.
probably the Louvre in Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mona Lisa or something?
and a lot of art in that Louvre.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. That's where I would go to.
Yeah, that would be nice to do that. And it'd be nice to also to if I were to win the big jackpot, for instance, I would like to go to New York City and go to the Metropolitan, the big art galleries in New York City, and then the others in the big cities. I guess you can get online in the library and you can Google those libraries.
Not the same.
Yeah,
No.
but at least, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Well,